Hi, everyone. I know it's been a little while since our last reading. I was just taking some time off to go through some work related things, and now since I'm taking a small break, I'm going to try and get some chapters done and read for you guys. And today we are getting back into our book, The Peoples of the History of the United States by Howard Zinn, and we are going to hop into chapter 11. So, robber barons and rebels. In the year 1877, the signals were given for the rest of the century. The black would be put back. The strikes of the white workers would not be tolerated. The industrial and political elites of North and South would take hold of the country and organize. The greatest march of economic growth in human history. They would do it with the aid of and at the expense of black labor, white labor, Chinese labor, European immigrant labor, female labor, rewarding them differently by race, sex, national origin, and social class, in a way as to create separate levels of oppression, a skillful terracing to stabilize the pyramid of wealth. Between the Civil War and 1900, steam and electricity replaced human muscle. Iron replaced wood, and steel replaced iron. Before the Bessemer process, iron was hardened to steel at the rate of 3 to 5 tons a day. Now the same amount could be processed in 15 minutes. Machines can now drive steel tools. Oil could lubricate machines and light homes. Streets, factories, and people and goods can move by railroad, propelled by steam along steel rails. By 1900, there were 193,000 miles of railroad. The telephone, the typewriter, and the adding machine speeded up the work of business. Machines changed farming. Before the Civil War, it took 61 hours to produce labor to produce an acre of wheat. By 1900, it took 3 hours and 19 minutes. Manufactured ice enabled the transport of food. Over long distances, the industry of meatpacking was born. Steam drove textile mills spineless. It drove sewing machines. It came from coal. Pneumatic drills now drill deeper into the earth for coal. In 1860, 14 million tons of coal were mined. By 1884, it was 100 million. More coal meant more steel, because coal furnaces converted from iron to steel. By 1880, a million tons of steel were being produced. By 1910, 25 million tons. By now, electricity was beginning to replace steam. Electrical wire needed copper, of which 30,000 tons were produced in 1880, 500,000 tons by 1910. To accomplish all this required ingenious investors of new processes and new machines, clever organizers and administrators of the new corporations, a country rich with land and minerals, and a huge supply of human beings due to the backbreaking, unhealthful, and dangerous work. Immigrants would come from Europe and China, so make the new railroad rates would move to the cities. By 1860 and 1914, New York grew from 850,000 to 4 million, Chicago from 110,000 to 2 million, and Philadelphia from 650,000 to 1.5 million. In some cases, the inventor himself became the greatest organizer of business, like Thomas Edison, inventor of electrical devices. In other cases, the businessman compiled other people's inventions, like Gustavus Swift, a Chicago butcher who put together the ice-cold railway car with the ice-cold warehouse to make the first national meatpacking company in 1885. James Duke used a new cigarette rolling machine that could roll, paste, and cut tubes of tobacco 900,000 cigarettes a day. In 1890, he came on the 4 biggest cigarette producers from the American Tobacco Company. While some multimillionaires started in poverty, most did not. One study, the origins of 303 textile, railroad, and steel executives of the 1870s, showed that 90% came from middle or upper class families. The Horatio Alger stories of, quote, rags to riches were true for a few men, but honestly a myth and useful myth for control. Most of the fortune building was done legally, with the collaboration of the government and the courts. Sometimes the collaboration had to be paid for. Thomas Edison promising New Jersey politicians $1,000 in each in return for favorable legislation. Daniel Drew and Jay Gould spent $1 million to bribe the New York legislature to legalize their issue of $8 million in, quote, watered stock not representing real value, on the Erie Railroad. The first transcontinental railroad was built with blood, sweat, and tears, and thievery. Out of the meeting of the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads, the Central Pacific started on the West Coast, going east. It spent $200,000 in Washington on bribes to get 9 million acres of free land, had 24 million in bonds, and paid 79 million an overpayment of 36 million to a construction company which really was its own. The construction was done by 3,000 Irishmen and 10,000 Chinese over a period of 4 years, working for $1 or $2 a day. The Union Pacific started in Nebraska, going west, and had been given 12 million acres of land and 27 million in government bonds. It created the Credit Mobilier Company and gave them 94 million for construction when the actual cost was 44. Shares were sold cheaply to congressmen to prevent investigation. This was at the suggestion of a director of credit, the suggestion of Massachusetts Congressman Oakes Ames, a shovel manufacturer and director of Credit Mobilier, who said, quote, there is no difficulty in getting men to look after their own property, end quote. The Union Pacific used 20,000 workers, war veterans and Irish immigrants, who laid 5 miles of track a day and died by the hundreds in the heat, the cold, and the battles with Indians opposing the invasion of their territory. Both railroads used the longer, twisting routes to get subsidies from towns they went through. In 1869, amid music and speeches, the two crooked lines met in Utah. The wild fraud on the railroads led to more control of railroad finances by bankers who wanted more stability, profit by law rather than by theft. By the 1890s, most of the country's railway mileage was concentrated in 6 huge systems. 4 of these were completely or partially controlled by the House of Morgan, and 2 others by the bankers, Kuhn, Loeb, and Company. J.P. Morgan had started before the war as the son of a banker who began selling stocks for the railroads for good commissions. During the Civil War, he bought 5,000 rifles for $350 each from an army arsenal and sold them to a general in the field for $22 each. The rifles were defective and would shoot off the thumbs of the soldiers using them. A congressional committee noted this in the small print of an obscure report, but a federal judge upheld the deal as the fulfillment of a valid legal contract. Morgan had escaped to military service in the Civil War by paying $300 to a substitute. So did John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Philip Armour, Jay Gould, and James Mellon. Mellon's father had written to him that, quote, a man may be a patriot without risking his own life or sacrificing his health. There are plenty of lives less valuable, end quote. It was the firm of Drexel, Morgan and Company that was given a U.S. government contract to float a bond issue of $260 million. The government could have sold the bonds directly. It chose to pay the bankers $5 million in commission. On January 2, 1889, as Gustavus Myers reports, a circular marked, quote, private and confidential, end quote, was issued by 3 banking houses of Drexel, Morgan and Company, Brown Brothers and Company, and Kidler, Peabody and Company. The most painstaking care as exercise that this document should not find its way into the press or other. Why it's become public? Why this fear? Because the circular was an invention. It was an invitation to the great railroad magnates to assemble at Morgan's house. Number 219, Madison Avenue, there to form, in the phrase of the day, an ironclad combination, a compact which would efface competition among certain railroads and unite those interests in an agreement by which the people of the United States would be bled even more effectively than before. There was a human cost to this exciting story of financial ingenuity. That year, 1889, records of the Interstate Commerce Commission showed that 22,000 railroad workers were killed or injured. In 1895, the gold reserve of the United States was depleted, while 26 New York City banks had $129 million in gold in their vaults. A syndicate of bankers headed by J.P. Morgan and Company, August Belmont and Company, the National City Bank, and others offered to give the government gold in exchange for bonds. President Grover Cleveland agreed. The bankers immediately resold the bonds at higher prices, making $18 million in profits. A journalist wrote, quote, "If a man wants to buy beef, he must go to the butcher. If Mr. Cleveland wants more gold, he must go to the big banker." End quote. While making his fortune, Morgan brought rationality and organization to the national economy. He kept the system stable. He said, quote, "We do not want financial convulsions and have one thing one day and one other thing another day." End quote. He linked railroads to one another, all of them to banks, banks to insurance companies, and by 1900, he controlled 100,000 miles of railroad, half the country's mileage. Three insurance companies, dominated by the Morgan Group, had $1 billion in assets. They had $50 million a year to invest, money given by ordinary people for their insurance policies. Louis Brandeis, describing this in his book, Other People's Money, before he became a Supreme Court justice, wrote, quote, "They control the people through the people's own money." End quote. John D. Rockefeller started as a bookkeeper in Cleveland, became a merchant, accumulated money, and decided that in the new industry of oil, who controlled the oil refineries, controlled the industry. He brought his first oil refinery in 1862, and by 1870 set up Standard Oil Company of Ohio, made secret agreements with railroads to ship his oil with them, and it gave him rebates, discounts, and underprices, and thus drove competitors out of business. One independent refinery said, quote, "If we did not sell out, we would have been crushed out. There was only one buyer on the market, and we had to sell it at their terms." End quote. Memos like this one passed among Standard Oil officials, quote, "Wilkerson and Co. received car of oil Monday 13th. Please turn another screw." End quote. A rival refinery in Buffalo was rocked by a small explosion arranged by Standard Oil officials with the refinery's chief and mechanic. The Standard Oil Company by 1899 was a holding company which controlled the stock of many other companies. This capital was $110 million. The profit was $45 million a year, and John D. Rockefeller's fortune was estimated at $200 million. Before long, he would move into iron, copper, coal, and steel, shipping, and banking. Chase Manhattan Bank. Profits would be $81 million a year, and the Rockefeller fortune would total $2 billion. Andrew Carnegie was a telegraph clerk at 17, then secretary to the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, then broker in Wall Street, selling railroad bonds for huge commissions, and was soon a millionaire. He went to London in 1872, saw the new Bessemer method of production steel, and returned to the United States to build a $1 million steel plant. Foreign competition was kept out by high tariff conventions set by Congress, and by 1880, Carnegie was producing 10,000 tons of steel a month, making $1.5 million a year in profit. By 1900, he was making $40 million a year, and that year at a dinner party, he agreed to sell his steel company to J.P. Morgan. He scribbled the price on a note, $492 million. Morgan then formed the U.S. Steel Corporation. Combining Carnegie's corporation with others, he sold stocks and bonds for $1.3 billion, about $400 million more than the combined worth of the companies. It took a fee of $150 million for arranging the consolidation. How could dividends be paid off to all those stockholders and bondholders? By making sure Congress passed tariffs, keeping out foreign steel, by closing off competitors and maintaining the price at $28 a ton, and by working 200,000 men 12 hours a day for wages that barely kept their families alive. And so it went, in industry after industry. Shrewd, efficient businessmen building empires, choking out competition, maintaining high prices, keeping wages low, using government subsidies. These industries were the first beneficiaries of the quote welfare state. By the turn of the century, American telephone and telegraph had a monopoly of the nation's telephone system. International Harvest made 85% of all farm machinery, and in every other industry, resources became concentrated. Controlled. The bank had interest in so many of these monopolies as to create an interlocking network of powerful corporation directors, each of them who sat on the boards of many other corporations. According to a Senate report on the early 20th century, Morgan, at its peak, had on the board of 48 corporations, Rockefeller, 37 corporations. All right, guys, I'm going to pause there for today. Um, with allergies and other shit, I'm not able to keep up for very long as was able to. I do appreciate you guys listening. I hope you guys have wonderful weather and stay safe. And for those who have seasonal allergies like myself, be careful. But that book details a lot that's going on today. You have a lot of monopolies. You have people who claim to have been born in poverty or middle class, but it's not true. There are these billionaires and millionaires now. A lot of them got money from mommy and daddy, or they had connections to people in positions of power. And it just shows how rigged the system actually is. But again, other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. Always feel free to follow me on social media. I'm everywhere. Um, I'm also willing to talk privately about any other issues you guys have, or maybe questions about the reading. You also can drop comments down below as well. And other than that, have a good day.